With that said, we'll start off by doing an affective part of the process, and then into that we'll build in an NLP kind of part. And then I'll talk a bit about NLP as how it was used at this point in the process for you. Fred will go into research on the mind-body connection, which is fascinating, about how the emotional aspects of holding on to grievances and anger actually affect your heart on a physiological level, which will lead you into an affective second part of the component. We'll talk a bit about a grievance forgiveness model that we synthesized, some of the common misunderstandings that keep people trapped or make it more difficult for them to forgive at times. Then a third affective component, the second part of the NLP piece, in which I'll talk briefly about what we did at that point. Then Fred will go right into a cognitive disputation component, and then a few words about forgiveness as prevention, and questions and answers. So we might raise some questions in your mind during the time we do this entire thing, and I'd like to ask to hold those kind of questions till later on, because it's really easy to get sidetracked and things. So we kind of were joking around saying, if me saying that kind of pisses you off, have we got a process for you?
Okay. Just one more reiteration is what we have done is taken three fairly common and simple psychotherapeutic approaches and blended them to an eye to looking at what is it that causes anger, what are the stages of the creation of anger so that you hold it as something we label a grievance, and then how can you unhook that? This is designed, again, to be a skeleton of what was a more comprehensive approach, but I think you'll get a flavor for this. So as a first step, I'd like everybody to just be willing to do a short visualization with us. And to that end, if you would close your eyes and allow yourself to be comfortable or, uncomfortable, if that's easier for you. Who knows, it's a big world out there. But if you would please close your eyes and just settle yourself into your breathing for maybe a minute or two, just to center and relax. And let us all kind of share that same quiet kind of space. And now just bring to mind someone with whom you have had some degree of difficulty in relationship with, some experience that caused you anger at them, say, in the last month or two, or just some experience at work that caused you a lot of stress that was related to another person, just some interpersonal dynamic that was difficult to you or that caused you to notice that this is a problem. And please don't pick anything extraordinary here. This is just a common experience. But I want you to bring that image to mind as much as you can, the experience of when that anger was generated.
And as that feeling begins to arise in you, I'd like you to take the hand that you normally do not write with and place it on that particular knee. Or, you don't have to really reach out to, just comfortably on that part of your body, on your thigh or your knee. And as the feeling come up, I'd like you to just kind of give yourself a little squeeze there, almost proportional to the feeling in a way. And just keep doing that throughout this part.
And if you can picture the situation or the scene where you felt aggrieved or hurt or angry, and if you can experience the dialogue of this scene and whatever images are there, just bring yourself into this situation and allow whatever you felt then to be as much of your experience now as you're able. And just one reminder that if you feel that sense of grievance, so just put a little pressure on that hand on your knee. Notice if there's any place in your body that feels disturbed. Notice if there's any cognitions going through your head about the experience of being disturbed or put off. Just notice what is there that for you shows that your boundaries were not respected. And now one final part of this opening exercise is bring to mind what you should have said at that moment to protect yourself or to defend your boundaries. And in your mind now, say it. We are often so well socialized or so cautious and so timid about when we need to say what has crossed the threshold. Just to yourself inwardly say what it was that bothered you. Be clear and emphatic about the transgression. And give yourself permission to just push aside some of the social constraints that would have had you not say what you would have needed to say at that time. And give it whatever level of intensity you need and whatever level of color and vividness.
While again, at the same time, give your knee a squeeze there as you're feeling things.
Okay, I want you to just slowly disconnect from that scene. Bring your attention just back to your breath for 1 or 2 breaths. Know that we're going to return to this image, that this is not finished, so you can let it go with assurance. And after those 1 or 2 slow, deep breaths, just please open your eyes.
You can let go of your knee if you're holding on to that.
If anybody needs medical attention to their knee.
You're going to have 40 people walking around with their hand on their knee all week. There was an intentional piece, as I mentioned in our outline, of neurolinguistic programming in here. I'm just curious, how many people have applied NLP in their practice? Okay, good. Regardless of its genesis, it's gotten to a point in its evolution where it's becoming very valuable in therapeutic circles these days. And we're using a very small piece of the NLP technology here called anchors, which is nothing more essentially than associations. Okay, association to the degree you could remember some kind of great music from the summer of '74, or something like that. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Where you hear a piece on the radio, all of a sudden your body is flooded with those kind of feelings to one degree or another. That's an anchor. That's an association. What it essentially does is it stabilizes a given emotional state or an affective state. So we used it here kind of as a bookmark. We wanted you in some way to be able to recall the state, partially through your body physiology, partially through your preconscious mind. We're going to use it later on. There's a number of what's called presuppositions that NLP is based on, and there's a few of them here that are in play that I just want to mention. One is that people always make the best choice that they perceive they have at the moment. Now, we can get into a great discussion on that, and we could perhaps defer some of that for later. But for now, I ask you to just toy around with that idea. What if it was true that people at that moment will make the best choice that here's the key word, that they perceive they have at that moment? And 2, NLP is utilized to increase choice with the presupposition that more choice is better than no choice. So what we're doing is we're setting things up here right now so that your preconscious mind down the line will be able to have a fast, automatic, responsive new choice as about to respond to a future grievance. Okay? And I think with that, I'll let you go on the research.
I want to just talk about one other part. I don't have to go over there.
Yeah.
Of why we had you consciously focus on a situation that made you angry. For me, there are two reasons for that, and they get at the heart of what makes forgiveness such a crucial experience. The first is that experience you just had of thinking, it was about 6 minutes, of somebody you're angry at, goes on in your mind all the time. The amount of times we get lost in those kind of reveries is enormous. The way we can drift off with that sense of this is what happened, and then we replay the situation, and then we think of what we should have said, and then we say it, and then we feel better for about a nanosecond until it comes back. That process is occurring all the time in you. It's not available to us often enough for conscious exploration. So that is one of the reasons why I, whenever I train this, start with the experience of anger. It makes some people a little uncomfortable because they're walking in, they want to learn how to forgive, they know how to be angry. Like that. That's like something we've got mastered. But there's another part to that, and that is to introduce just a brief touch of some of the newest research on the effect of anger on personal health, in particular the functioning of the heart. My own job right now is a research fellow at Stanford Center for Research and Disease Prevention, and I do work like this with patients with congestive heart failure. The interesting thing is that our heart health is on a continuum. There are some of us whose heart health is remarkable and they can respond to any stressful situation and immediately recover. There are other people whose heart health is compromised, and when stress or a difficult situation comes and their heart has to activate, their recovery time is longer, or it takes more out of their bodies. What's so remarkable is that the experience that you just had of 5 minutes of self-thinking anger, nobody here was involved in any situation that could cause them anger at this moment. And yet I still saw knees being squeezed. We have the ability to make ourselves angry, and for good or bad, it's common knowledge that causes the activation of the same neurochemical pathways as if we're facing a tiger. However, more likely than not, if you're facing a tiger, the activation will be stronger and more immediate. I would hope so. But what does happen, and here's the remarkable thing, is in a technique for evaluating heart health called heart rate variability has been around for about 20 years. It's being used now to explore the immediate effect of emotion on health. And what heart health variability is that our hearts beat rhythmically. They beat an average of 60 to 80 times a minute, but the distance between those heartbeat varies. So like between beat 1 and beat 2, maybe 1 second. Between beat 2 and beat 3, maybe 0.8 tenths of a second. But between beat 3 and beat 4, maybe 1.5 seconds. And it's designed to be naturally rhythmic. And the reason it's designed to be naturally rhythmic is to give us the greatest flexibility in our experience of life. That if we have a compromised heart function, our ability to adapt to our environment is limited. The heart rate variability shows that compromise immediately. And 5 minutes, and actually 5 seconds, of having an experience of anger decreases the flexibility in your heart response, and if it's intense enough, causes it to become electrically incoherent. To the degree that if its incoherence is strong enough, it starts to mirror what in a sick person would be an arrhythmia. And if the compression is significant enough, due to the degree of anger, it starts to mirror people who have advanced heart disease. The difference is we get out of this. People who are sick do not get out of this compromised rhythm. Now, within 5 minutes of the response of our hearts to anger, what has happened is immediately the sympathetic nervous system has kicked in. The signals coming from your brain to the heart and then responded back through the vagus nerve from the heart to the brain are that our system is in jeopardy. The experience of anger sends the message that our system is in jeopardy. Our heart rate speeds up, and therefore it constricts the flexibility in the heart system so that it becomes less capable of reacting to what is needed, which we all know as under stress our attention gets focused. We can't think of the weather so much if a car is coming at us. When we're thinking of being angry, when we are angry, our attention is focused in that direction. That is mirrored precisely by an electrocardiogram reading of the variability in your heart function. When the variability is impaired enough, it starts to become in sync. The electrical rhythm becomes in sync with the rhythms of your brain measured on an EEG and the rhythm of your breathing. They all synchronize at the same point. Therefore, we have what is called then a condition called cortical inhibition, meaning I was so stressed I couldn't think straight. However, that shows up on just putting wires on your head, 3 wires on your heart, and monitoring your breath. That shows up mimicked by the experience of anger, even without anything in front of you to become angry with, except what's in your own mind. So we don't realize then what the effect is. This is the key point, why forgiveness is so important, is when we have these episodes of, say, 5 minutes of mulling over a situation that's uncomfortable, or we're driving and we remember the person who did X to us and we're pissed off, and we forget, between here and San Francisco, we've thought only of that. We are, number one, inhibiting our full physical functioning. But number two, we're creating a drain on our cortical functioning. And therefore, at the moment of anger, we are actually less capable of thinking of the optimal solution to our problems than we are when we're not in the experience of anger. Now, we all know that kind of intuitively, but to see it played out on a screen, you can have this done in real time. If I were hooked up to one of these machines, the two systems, the autonomic nervous system is divided into the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. This is pretty elementary. The sympathetic nervous system starts within 1 beat, the change in amplitude. The parasympathetic, which is the slowing down system, takes 5 beats of the heart to fully register a change. But it's that quick and that dramatic, the effect of our emotional status on our heart health. The other thing that has come out is that the electrical signal generated by the heart is up to 40 times more powerful than the electrical signal generated by the brain. Therefore, when we are feeling a disturbed negative emotion, we are sending those signals to every atom of our body. Our brain at that point has a harder time thinking ourselves out of it, but more important, has a harder time taking advantage of what we need to do to get ourselves out of that situation. So not only then is anger detrimental to our sense of personal experience, but it turns out that it has consequences for our health and consequences for our ability to think. One further point, just very briefly, is actual studies done doing exactly what I did to you for 5 minutes. They have measured people's salivary IgA. Just, you spit into a cup, and it's the first line of immune system defense, which is linked to colds and the flu and stuff like that. It's the kind of thing where they would take medical students, and right before exams, they'd show their salivary IgA was completely down. 5 minutes of anger is enough to reduce salivary IgA for up to 6 hours in a normal subject. 5 minutes. It's startling to me personally how many 5-minute periods I spend in unconscious reverie like that. But it's one of the compelling reasons to take another look at our kind of careless mind wanderings, which lead us to hold on to grievances and don't allow us to think that it's in our best interest to let them go. The other point of this that I want to make before Eric continues is the converse is as true. And this is the healing part of this. 5 minutes of thoughts of appreciation have the same effect on salivary IgA in the opposite direction. And the same is true for the heart health. When you hook people up to those same monitors and you have them think of someone they love dearly, the rhythms become to their extreme. They become balanced, coherent, and they have the opposite effect on the cortical experience, and they actually enhance the ability of the cortex to function effectively. That's just a very brief overview of some of the consequences and then the responses to our own self-referential, self-generated anger. We're going to ask you to then shift with us into more of the healing part of this. And again, I'd like you to close your eyes. And for this, again, just take 2 or 3 slow, deep breaths. And try to really fill your abdomen and chest cavity when you breathe in. Just try to expand and open to the breathing as best you can. And just notice where your attention is. Is your attention in your, mostly focused on your ears, your sense of hearing or thinking or in a part of your body? Just notice where your attention is. What I'd like you to do is consciously shift your attention to the area around your heart. And as a way to do that, it's often useful to breathe into and out of the area around your heart. Not necessarily your physical heart, just the place in the center of your chest where your feelings are or where you would experience heartfelt emotion. And it sometimes can help to put your hand there, but the whole point of this is just to bring your attention to the area around your heart and allow your breath to come into and out of that area as it fills your chest. Now already, every single one of you has affected a change in your autonomic nervous system. The energy in the room has changed, and the energy within your body has changed. There's been a rhythmic change in the functioning of your heart, and the electrical system in your heart will be more coherent than when you were either thinking of anger or had your concentration spread. But just for the practice of this, just as you listen to my voice, just keep your attention focused on the area around your heart. And sometimes it's nice to just imagine maybe a warm sun beating down on you. But keep your attention on the heart area. You're just breathing gently into and out of the area around your heart. If your attention wanders, just return it. It can be helpful to envision a sense of warmth or the sun's rays, or any kind of healing energy to create warmth in that area. What I'd like you to do is keep your attention on your heart. Allow your breath to come into and out of the area around your heart. But open your eyes and try to hold that focus of heart-centeredness while Eric continues with our discussion.
Okay, at this point, we'd like to talk a bit about this grievance forgiveness model we put together. It's on your page. I apologize, I didn't have enough time up front to put it up here, so you're going to have to look up and down a bit. It doesn't matter to me if you don't stare at me. I don't know where they are.
I sent them around.
Maybe for now you could just look on with somebody. We have two sides here, the grievance side of the model and the forgiveness side of the model. And the interesting thing is that it just occurred to me a few moments ago is nobody really needs to be taught how to forgive. This is a very core part of who we are. Now, the interesting thing is nobody needs to be taught how to create a grievance either. This is a different part of us. So we have here a grievance part, or how to create a grievance, really. Here's a formula for how to create a grievance. That's probably the best way to look at this recipe. And it comes from what we're calling the separate self, which is, the ego self of sorts. And I'll say a little bit about that later. You want to take them through this bit here?
When we look at what is it that allows someone to be hurt or angry at somebody, we've divided it up into a 3-step process. The first step is you have to take something personally. Now, this is a component that is obvious but ignored in many people's conception of what anger is. And I've used a very simple teaching example that kind of makes the point very clear, which is, at this very moment in this planet of ours, there are probably 10 million people who are being cheated on by their spouses. And we've got 5 billion people on the planet, right? So maybe 1 million people. There are at least another million people who are being robbed, 500,000 maybe starving to death. Whatever it is, at this moment, an enormous amount of horror and suffering is going on, most of which we couldn't care less about. We have to take it personally. It's not the event themselves that do it. Yes, the events are a trigger. But if we were such crusaders, all the other 999,000 people whose spouse or significant other or whomever was lying to them or cheating on them would have the same effect. We have to take something personally. The problem occurs that when we take it personally, when we decide that this happened to us and it doesn't feel good, because what happens when we take it personally, it hurts us somewhere. You see, that little talk on what the heart's response to stress is means that when you start to take something personally, your heart hurts. Your immune system is weakened. Your thoughts get cloudy. That doesn't feel good. What we do with that is we blame the person who did this thing to us for the problem. We recognize the suffering within ourselves, and then we blame what was the outside source for that suffering. Those two steps are critical, but they're not enough to create a long-standing grievance. One, we have to take it personally. We have to take offense. Two, we have to then blame someone. Because if we took offense and then said, well, here's my heart doing its thing, here's my, immune system doing its thing, here's my thoughts getting fuzzy again, we don't got a problem. We blame somebody else for what we perceive as the intrusion in our field. But then we do it one better. We create a grievance. We create a mental representation of this process that we put a label to, and then store it in our memory banks with many access keys to get at it. We have, you could be walking down the street and you could see something that reminds you of how crappy this person was to you, and bam. Or we could do what I asked you to do and just consciously think for a couple minutes of what made me angry. We have many triggers because there's a little space contained in our mind that goes grievance, and red lights go off when we want to access it, and we then have a storyline. We have who hurt me, why they're wrong, how bad it is, you wouldn't believe it. We have all these little components that we label as a grievance. And then we have this thing to very generously usually share with our friends. You wouldn't believe what this person did to me. Forgetting completely that it took those steps of taking offense and offering blame before that grievance could be formed. We simply ignore those steps and announce our grievance.
And the interesting thing that occurred to us as we were working this out is that probably in most cases when grievances are generated, but especially in the chronic situations, it seems that the relationship between responsibility is reversed. Most of the time what happens is, in a healthy situation, it is we take the responsibility for things in our life. Now, I want to separate that out from the word blame. That's one of the tricks the ego uses to keep us from taking responsibility. I'm not being blamed for this. But I'm saying responsibility. Typically, when you're an empowered person, you take responsibility for situations as to what you have control over, and you can act and respond accordingly. And then you do the same thing. You give other people the responsibility that they are supposed to own for themselves. Well, interestingly enough, we found that in grievance situations, it's reversed. I take responsibility for stuff in you, and I give you responsibility for stuff in me. Very interesting. So the grievance part generator, separate self, is really the ego self of sorts. Now, the result of everything that Fred mentioned is over time, if this is done, especially in chronic cases, you've seen people who are really angry almost all the time. The result is that energy is drained away. You could see from everything that Fred was talking about, it's constantly affecting the physiology. That's why on the first page I wrote over here, I don't know how many people saw, a couple of years, 7 or 8 years ago, I came up with a bumper sticker. It says, "Open your heart today, don't wait for a surgeon to do it for you." Very apropos, huh? And I've got it on the back of my little red car, and I like to look in the rearview mirrors to see if anybody's reading it as I stop. Not when I stop short. That's a different story. So, now on the other side of the grievance side, which is the ego generator of sorts, it's the ego's job to generate that, is the forgiveness part of us, which we equate to the authentic self. It's the natural process that occurs when the authentic self is able to express itself. Now, as you would imagine, it's almost directly opposite of what the ego self does to create a grievance, to generate forgiveness. Instead of taking things personally, it takes less offense. So it's looking at it from a transpersonal perspective. It's able to automatically be in both planes at the same time. So the natural occurrence of that is it offers less blame. And in so doing, when I mentioned before about the responsibility reversal, what it does is it seeks, here's the interesting thing. The ego self seeks power by holding judgment and wanting others to change. It's in the model over here. But the authentic self seeks power by accepting appropriate responsibility. It's a big difference. And as a result, its natural outgrowth of that is to offer understanding. Now, the result of that is your physiology appropriately responds in that direction, and a lot of the energy that's usually going right down the tube in the anger direction is now freed up, right, for more creative use. Because our natural way of operating in the universe is to be creative. And we're given all this energy, right? You're going to create something with that energy, guaranteed. That's impossible to not create. So you're either going to create it using the anger mode, and we're kind of simplifying it a bit here, but it really comes down to that, or you'll create it in the truly creative mode of releasing it to be free to do more creative and healthful kind of things in your life. So the ego's job is to perceive separation. That's its job. The mind's job is to think, or the brain, the heart's job is to feel. The ego's job is to perceive separation. Therefore, it should come no surprise. Its behavior should come as no surprise. The interesting thing about this in this model that we have here is that a person's consciousness at any one point is falling somewhere along this continuum. Nobody's always in the authentic self, and nobody's always in the grievance self or the separate self, but there's some kind of a continuum. And as a practitioner, the key is to kind of sense where they are in that process, and you help to move them gently into the direction that would best serve them. There's a few misunderstandings that I wanted to go over that are typically employed by the separate self to perpetuate its power and its hold over, the perceptions of a given situation. Forgiveness is one of the largest threats. This is coming right out of the Course in Miracles, paraphrasing. Forgiveness is one of the larger threats to the ego. Therefore, there will be a natural resistance to forgiveness. Because we're talking about the ego giving up its power in order to forgive, so we could understand where the resistance comes from. So the first misunderstanding here I have is one forgives for the sake of the other. Whoa, I'm not forgiving you. That keeps us stuck in the grievance self. The understanding, I kind of broke it into misunderstanding and understanding. The understanding perception of that is that one really forgives for one's own sake. In light of everything we're talking about today, it's a little bit easier to see how insane it is to consider that forgiveness is for the other person's sake. Now, that will naturally help them, because you're not sending these bullets at them anymore on the psychic plane. But the first person that gets affected by holding a grievance is us. Then, secondarily, it might affect the other person or not, but it's almost immaterial. The primary person is us. So, truthfully, we forgive for our own sake. And to communicate that to clients makes it a lot easier when they get it all of a sudden. Say, oh boy, now what do I do here? The other one is to forgive means condoning the behavior. My parents are Holocaust survivors. I know about practicing forgiveness. And I can go way off on that. My physiology just changed talking about it, as you can see. The thing is, though, to forgive really is to recognize the essential innocence that's in the center of us. That's what it is. It's an acknowledgement of our true nature, above and beyond the separate self. Third misunderstanding is, if I forgive, I have to have them in my life and they can hurt me again. Well, nobody's saying that to forgive means to be stupid. Let's get this clear here. There's a wonderful, wonderful line that Stephen Levine used at a workshop that I was at with him that put this immediately into perspective. And he says that if somebody is in your space and they're operating in a relatively unskillful fashion that is causing pain in your life, you can throw them out of your house without having to throw them out of your heart. And with that,
speaking of the heart, there is a remarkable intelligence that can be accessed by opening our hearts. It was touched upon briefly by the research that I quoted about how the positive thinking and the positive feeling opens the channels from the heart to the brain to facilitate thinking. But when we have eliminated, to whatever degree we're capable, of emotional disturbance, then we become available to enormous amounts of energy. The heart is probably the single most powerful way to get there quickly. So I would hope that everybody would be willing to, since you're all in your hearts still, just reconnect your attention there to the area around your heart. And bring your breath back to that area. And it's very important for this exercise that to whatever degree you're able, your attention is in the area around your heart. And now I want you to picture someone that you love very dearly. I want you to picture a person or a time or an experience that for you was just as close to love as you can have. For many people, it's the face of their children. There's no limit. What allows you to touch gratitude and appreciation and love? And I want you to bring that image to your mind and hold that feeling in the area around your heart now. You've shifted to the heart. You've accessed an image of a person or a situation that is as loving as you have in your experience, and that feeling of warmth and gratitude and appreciation hold in the area around your heart. The studies I quoted before, there's another one. When they have taken young college students who are deeply in love, their immune system functioning goes off the scale in a positive direction. Your body is meant to experience love. That is the place where your heart, your immune system, your nervous system, and your cortical functioning are all facilitated. We all know that. What we're talking about is the conscious direction of this. So hold that feeling in the area around your heart. Breathe into and out of your heart for a couple of slow, deep breaths. What I want you to do now, just as one further step to this, is look inside that heart, your open heart, your experience of appreciation. Is there anything that you can learn to see differently about that grievance that you thought about a half hour ago? Is there any peace or understanding that emerges? If you need to, this can be useful. Bring yourself back up to your head area just for a moment to remember that grievance. Don't stay there, and shift right back down to your heart if you need to. But in your heart, hold the feeling of love or appreciation or gratitude. Keep your hand over your heart and look inside and ask your intuitive guidance, your heart wisdom, whatever. Is there anything that I can see differently or understand about that grievance situation? Is there anything here for me to see differently? Any way that I can be helped by this?
Or anything I can learn from this?
Because to whatever degree you are capable of experiencing love, appreciation, or gratitude, your systems are in harmony. And when they're in harmony, your energy is freed to experience and guide you. Now, that doesn't mean that every time you do this, you're going to get great insights. But more often than not, you will. Because understanding can be subtle.
Keeping your hand on your heart. Just feeling this love, feeling these feelings, feeling this energy, whatever word you wish to attach to it. I'd like you to take this now and take your other hand and put it back on your knee. Both hands are on the body simultaneously. And what I'd like you to do now is take all the feelings and the resources, the energy from your heart, and send it back into that experience that you have with your knee. And just hold them there simultaneously. And notice how different that experience, that old experience, would be, taking all this energy and sending it into that. Not the external experience, your internal experience of it. And then let go of the knee. Just put your attention back at your heart. Take a few deep breaths. Staying in this space, as I talk to you a bit, again, you can either have your eyes opened or closed at this point. There's a second piece of the neurolinguistics that we just did over here. Simple and yet powerful. We once again, if you'll recognize now, what we did is we had you come up with a positive state, and we actually had you self-anchor that with your dominant hand. I used the non-dominant hand for the anger experience because I wanted it to come in through your unconscious channel. I used the dominant hand for your positive experience because I want that to be more available to you on a conscious level more often. Except what I mentioned in the early stages is that people would typically, not only typically, almost all the time, choose the best direction they perceive for themselves at any one point. Now that choice happens at lightning speed on a preconscious level and then bubbles up to the surface and then you act. So what we just did here is we presented, now I'll back up one step. Oftentimes when a typical set of stimulus occur and you go right into the anger reaction, what happens is it happens so fast there was no thought involved. The emotions are there and then you're off on this roller coaster until further notice. What we just did here is now we introduced that, the associations to that old experience, right, with the associations of the loving experience, and we kind of collapsed them or collided them in your preconscious mind simultaneously by firing off these two anchors simultaneously. What that did is it gave your brain a chance to say, I've got a new choice in that kind of a situation the next time it occurs for me. Two things happened. It kind of sent energy back into the past. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but that is effectively what happened. So it kind of changes the memory to some degree of that past experience. And it also sends it off into the future so that next time you walk into a situation that used to cause you to react the old way, you'll have a much greater chance to respond in this way. Kind of dilates time a bit and gives you a different choice in the situation. Now with that, please place your hand, please place the hand that you don't write with on your knee as Fred continues here.
We're just going to do a very brief, quick review of this. So if you could just get into your mind some concern, problem with somebody, not going to take too long, but just hold an image of something that bugged you, bothered you in the recent past. And when you feel the energy of that experience in your body, just touch your knee, grab your knee. Now, when that image is clear, just shift your attention to the area around your heart. And remember a scene of beauty, a person you love, a wonderful moment in your life, some experience that you can feel gratitude and appreciation for. And bring your hand, the other hand, to your heart. And hold that feeling. Hold it, gently cup it, embrace it with that hand in the area around your heart, and hold that feeling of appreciation and love. And now ask your heart's wisdom. What could I learn? What new way could I perceive this situation? Is there anything here for me to grow? Just whatever question works for you, allow the information to come from your open heart. Sometimes it can be helpful if something has come to you. If you want to write it down, it's nice to see sometimes later on when again the mind replays the grievance. But there usually will be something that will emerge, some resource, some choice, as Eric has says, that we weren't aware of when this started. Some intuitive sense will come from us. And it'll give us a completely new perspective on this grievance. It will have shifted our perspective so that we have a whole new series of choices. And when you have a new series of choices, you can make better decisions. And remember that when you're angry, when you've created a grievance, you have limited your mind's ability to function creatively. Your heart frees up that energy. Okay. If everybody would please open their eyes. And I'm going to talk for just a couple more minutes about another component of this, very briefly. And that is, what is the mind's role in creating the grievance in the first place? Now, many of you are therapists, and many of you who aren't are savvy enough to know that we all have belief systems, and we all have basic ways of processing information in the world that causes us to react to certain things and not react to others. But at the heart of the creation of anger is a very peculiar belief. The belief has, to me, two main branches. One, we know what's best for other people. And two, because we know what's best, we can expect them to change. If we didn't have those beliefs percolating in our heads somewhere, we would get a lot less angry. Because we would notice that the world's operating the way it's supposed to be operating, except for our 2 cents. This is the number one primary cognitive distortion, which is that the world should behave the way I think it should. The world meaning people, events, places, time situation, friends, lovers, parents. The list is endless of the number of people we place demands on to behave in a certain way. When those demands are violated, we get angry. The anger doesn't arise out of nothing. It arises out of a core belief that the world should conform to us. It's that simple. The world should be the way I want it to be. My little corner of understanding is big enough so that I can make claim on everybody else's behavior. It's an interesting arrogance. The problem is that arrogance hurts us. As we both have said on a number of occasions, the person that gets swallowed up by this is ourselves. So I would like you to do just a very simple exercise with me. And that is to look at that situation that you first thought of as your grievance and just brainstorm with yourself all the ways you thought that other person should behave differently than they actually did. It's sometimes helpful just to jot these down, but this is just a simple brainstorming exercise of how did I know best for somebody else's behavior. And if you'll notice, all of the ways that you know best were the things that you were saying to them when they invaded your boundaries. How dare you not understand that I do this? Or, I mean, again, many of you are therapists. You know, as I do, that you see couples in quarrel, and what they do is they tell each other how to behave, and they don't listen to each other, so they tell it louder. And since they don't listen that time, they get angry and tell them even louder, and then start calling them names for being so stupid. And then they get physically upset because the other person isn't listening to their way that the other person should behave better, and it escalates into something wild. Never examining that where did they get this crazy belief that they could tell other people how to behave. Part of what we have simply labeled the separate self. But that crazy belief is at the core of the creation of grievance. If we didn't have this belief kind of filter that gets triggered, we wouldn't take offense. We wouldn't take blame. one of the things that the heart intelligence allows us to do is to get the clarity that allows us to see some of these silly things that we demand of other people. Those silly things come out in the form of usually understanding. I understand that that's the way they are. I understand that they behave that way because of the way they were raised. I understand that I don't know enough. I understand. That's what our heart tells us.
It seems that, I just had this brilliant thought that just flew in and out of my mind. Go ahead, it'll come back in a moment.
These are two pathways to the same place. There are two pathways to understanding. Because in our model of a grievance, the opposite of a grievance is offering understanding. You're simply a channel for open-hearted understanding. That is a present tense experience. You are understanding, or you have the capacity to create a grievance. They cannot exist together. Yeah, they do exist in relative, because we can be 80% understanding and 20% have a grievance. But the basic premise is, if we look at things with an open heart and a clear mind, the amount of grievances that we're ever going to form are so much fewer. And if we access both the intelligence of our heart and, as many therapists have been trained in, simple cognitive behavioral disputation practices as to how you allowed yourself to get angry in the first place. What were the beliefs under there? What were the core assumptions? How did you place your demands on the world at large? How did you decide that your life must be easy? How did you decide that other people should do things for you? How did you decide you have to be loved? All these very common misperceptions of belief are the triggers that allow us to get angry. We can heal them either through the heart or through the mind, or both. But the end point is the same.
Well, what I realize is the transpersonal perception seems to come through the intuitive heart-mind, and not through the rational mind. Right. Although you can get at it by applying the rational mind in appropriate ways.
And that's what we're focusing on just in this last couple of minutes. Is there's nothing so esoteric about this. Yes, the heart is a wonderful instrument and has tremendous power. But simple cognitive behavioral disputations can get you to the same place if you as a counselor have an open heart to know where to go. If you buy into the model of it makes sense to create anger and you have to have grievances and you forget that it's offense and blame that caused them, then you don't necessarily have the open-hearted space to lead somebody there. But if you do connect to that, then there are very simple and practical cognitive disputation ways to let people challenge some of the situations that make them angry. And then the heart can take him to places of even greater wellness than just, I'm not angry, or I understand. And that's just simply the last point that I want to make in this, is my vision for this. When I started this experiment, my goal was to create forgiveness as prevention. That is, how do we help people prevent getting upset in the first place? Because that's really the best goal we can all have. It's one thing, and we've talked a bit about how to help you resolve a grievance that's already created. But what happens if you don't take offense or offer blame in the first place?
The Dalai Lama is an excellent example of that. I mean, so to anybody's mind I heard go, I don't know if that's possible. I threw out an example here.
At least it's a reasonable example.
Right. I mean,
we can all attain.
To attain that. And yet,
no problem.
To the degree, to speak to the preventative side of things, this process or anything relating to forgiveness requires practice. If for no other reason than to reverse the enormous inertia that we've been indoctrinated into, not to mention the reflections out there that we get that tell us grievances are right, they're justified, don't tell me to forgive that person, blah, blah, and endlessly. Right? So it's our hope a bit that from today you can realize that that's really an insane thought, and that in fact forgiveness is perhaps one of the primary spiritual practices that that is out there. I think it's been practiced in many various kind of religious ways, but now fortunately is filtering down to the secular side of things. So I think with that, Fred has something?
The only other thing that I want to say is the model that I used to train this had 4 steps of forgiveness. Everybody's got a model, right? You can't give a talk without a model. The first step is the normal anger reaction. I'm pissed off, I'm justified, get out of my way. The second step is when you realize that makes you uncomfortable, that in the research on forgiveness, people don't forgive until they hurt inside and they can't resolve it. Then they look for other avenues. But the second stage of this is, well, this isn't getting me anywhere. My life's not working. I want to let this go, and you struggle through forgiving. That's the place that most people are at. It's a long, kind of laborious process of grappling with all the hurt and stuff and all the wounding. The third step, though, is after you've done that a couple of times, you see the advantage of trying to forgive because of your own clarity and your own heart. And you speed up that process. But the fourth step is to look actively for situations where you might have a trigger and to go directly into your heart or go directly into a disputation, to anticipate and forgive in advance, to simply know that this is the way life can be and I have choices as to how to respond to it. So that model simply takes the amount of time from the insult to the forgiveness stage and collapses it.
And with that, we're doing great on time, so about 15 minutes for questions and comments. Alan?
This might relate to a misunderstanding of forgiveness, but one of the critiques of many of our systems of therapy is that it makes us kind of socially inactive, like we psychologize everything and then we don't fight injustice in the world.
Uh-huh.
So the question I have is, when we've forgiven and kind of taken responsibility for our own part of the problem, how do we still engage in like passionate social justice to prevent, because a lot of these things that we might need to forgive shouldn't happen. They're bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't want us to forgive in such a way that we kind of let it be.
Yeah.
And so that's my question to you. That seems a step beyond what you're talking about, which, I like what you're talking about. It's very powerful, but I'm thinking ahead to not just kind of saying, well, that's the way the world is and I can't do anything about it.
No, I really appreciate your question, and this is my favorite part of any time we do talks, because this is where the real juice stuff comes out. None of this ought to be designed to reduce the passion to fight social injustice, as an example. It's my contention that when you free up, because there's a hidden implication here, right, that I need the grievance to have the passion to fight the injustice. And my contention is that releasing the grievance will free up such creative energy that will come up with brilliant solutions that couldn't have been conceived of before.
And even more, and just corollary to that, again, anger is not the most efficient response to a situation because, number one, it compels other people usually to react with anger towards us or resistance. And number two, wears us out.
And I think this is well illustrated if you read the accounts of various spiritual masters. Yogananda has an enormous amount of these stories, and I know Nityananda, and I love collecting guru stories. And whereas, somebody comes up with enormous anger at the guru or ready to kill them for some ridiculous reason, and they just get into that space of unbelievable, unconditional love that surrounds that guru, and that person is transformed just miraculously. Right? Because a miracle, according to Course in Miracles, is defined as a change in perception. That's a lot easier than changing physical reality. Yeah?
Well, I think besides anger, there are other emotions involved, such as pain and hurt.
Yes.
In terms of forgiveness. So let's say I'm not angry at somebody, but I might be hurt by what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say they're disrespectful for some reason, or they've disrespected my boundaries. So how do you deal with that? And what is the idea of of working with forgiveness there.
Yeah, well, thank you, because I didn't get to say the fourth point under the misunderstandings part. And that is, the caveat around all this is, don't forgive before it's time. So, what I mean by that is, instantaneous forgiveness, if anybody's selling that, is probably not going to work, number one, and number two, it's probably going to be hazardous to your health. So there's a natural, organic process that we go through about processing our hurts and our wounds. This process here today will help accelerate that, I believe. It's not that you don't feel the hurts and the wounds. In fact, what happens is when you notice most people, where they go out of their hearts and into their heads and into the grievance, is a defense to feeling those wounds, right? So what we did here is going to bring you in touch with that, right, to some degree. It would not just simply into the wound, but into the wound with simultaneously the healing nectar that will help the wound. Does that make sense?
And the process is not that different in creating a hurt as it is in creating like a violation. You still have to take it personally. Something had to happen to you, and you had to find somebody there who did it. And there's still some constriction of your own inner being that occurs after that experience that limits your ability to fully experience your joy or your love or your appreciation. And the same process of, like, what did I expect differently from the world that I didn't get is there. It's not hurt and anger. It's physiologically they're very similar. The nervous system reacts fairly similar to them both. For some people, what one person labels hurt, another person will label anger. It's very hard to sometimes tell them apart physiologically. Some of us are more comfortable with calling the change in our physiology anger. Some people are more comfortable calling it hurt. Some people are more comfortable calling it this. But it still depends on some process of the world or something in you or outside of you happened that you don't want to have happened. And then the emotional consequence occurs. That would be one part that I would respond to.
Well, I know you had your hand up first, so I want to be fair here in this process.
I seem to work with a large number of clients who are even better facilitating something between another person and they are forgiving themselves. And I'm wondering if you just use the same process to help them, because they can just be so self-punishing and know that they are, but don't seem to be able to come.
Well, sure. I think the process is effective when the person is ready or willing, right? They might not know how to forgive themselves or another, but if they're just willing, this process then they're more ready for the process. If somebody says, I'm pissed off at this person, I don't want to forgive them for beans, don't throw this process at them, because then they'll be pissed off at you for trying it, So there's a time when the door is open, When somebody's ready, this process will help facilitate any letting go kind of a thing.
And one of the things, if one of the problems with using the word forgiveness is I don't want to hold too tightly to just that word. The accessing of heart intelligence, the clear thinking, those are processes that lead to understanding and open-heartedness. Forgiveness is a term that can sometimes get in people's way. They can still make the progress or make the movement to an open-hearted understanding without ever having to use the word forgiveness. But they become present. They become present in their own bodies and their own hearts. Yeah. And therefore the grievance has melted away. Whether the grievance is at themselves or at somebody else, it's still some violation occurred of what that person thought was appropriate. And then the cascade occurs, and we're teaching just a process of how to reverse some of that flow. The word forgiveness is not the critical part in this. It's a critical concept, and it's a wonderful experience. But open-heartedness and a clear mind can occur without having to call it forgiveness.
It's an excellent point, because if a client comes to you and says, I'm really in pain, and you do work with them, and you understand that it's because they're holding on to grievances, and you say to them, well, would you like to forgive this person? There's so many misunderstandings built into there that they're going to say, oh, no. But if you say, would you like to feel better about this situation, all of a sudden the resistance is gone. So this is just a new distinction that came up from your questions that we'll build into this, I assure you. Yeah, you had your hand up.
Not clear between situations or people you're dealing with and the non-specific. Like I'm listening now to some of Stephen Sinatra's tapes of how the heart is affected emotionally, and he talks about just feeling impotent in the world and not doing anything. Well, you can't forgive a person or a thing. Can you forgive a non-specific they? I mean, you have to grasp hold of...
So do you mean like the government or like...
They, whoever they is.
I mean, it's a they, right. Right. They is the most populous person on the planet. I don't know who they is.
There are millions of theys.
Yes. Well, what are we talking about here? We're talking about, fundamentally, the person is holding on to something that's causing them pain. It's immaterial what that projection is about.
True.
Therefore, they come to you and say, they are causing me all this pain. And you say, well, would you like to feel better about it? And then you start on the process.
And I will take one more question. For what this is worth, when I actually did this study, it was a randomized controlled trial of 55 Stanford students. And you got about an hour's worth of process. They got 6 hours. The results that I got were very strong. I mean, high significance in many variables, and almost 20% reduction in trait and state anger in people who started normal. These were normal college students with just anger towards a specific person. They didn't have any pathology per se. The experience of getting into your heart and challenging together some of those erroneous thinking processes, and Eric has added this neuro-linguistic grounding. The process itself is very powerful. And all of you simply saw that when you focused on a grievance, you had a certain mind-body experience in this room. When you focused on love and your heart, you had a very different mind-body experience. That mind-body experience, for whatever moment you were present in that love, forgiveness was there. There was nobody for you to forgive in the moment that you felt an open heart. When you challenged the thinking of they did something to me, at that moment there is nothing to forgive. There is forgiveness. We immediately come back in with many thoughts and many ideas, and we recreate grievances constantly. But there are those moments of clarity. Forgiveness is right there. It's not necessarily such a long, involved, tortuous thing. It's being present in an open heart. And that is not so difficult to get across to people when you believe it. It's like, I'm sorry.
I have a question for one more.
Yeah.
I just want to know when and how we can get this tape.
Yeah, thank you.
We have to make it first.
Well, right. Well, what we did in preparing for this workshop was essential to doing the tape, right? And we're going to be moving on it. On the handouts, we have our names and telephone numbers and addresses and our email addresses. So that's for a number of purposes. One, if you write to us or email us or whatever, we'll get you information on the tape when it's available. Two, if you have any questions concerning this process at all, we'll be available to talk, outside of here. And then you can continue by contacting us if you want to, actually. So I just wanted to say we really appreciated spending the time with you here today. It's just a wonderful journey. I think it's just a good sign that this kind of a conversation is now occurring more and more in the mainstream. So I appreciate that. One logistical question I know that Claire wanted me to mention. If somebody's in this room for CEU credits, you got to fill out a form. So make sure two forms.
And sign out.
Oh, so...
One set of forms if you want psychology, and another set of forms if you're MFCC LPS.
Okay, well, to that end, I have 2 words to end today. Forgive me.